Hello and welcome to Audiobook Connection, behind the scenes with the creative teams. I'm Becky Parker-Geist and I'm your host. Audiobook Connection is your place to learn about the audiobook creative process and for authors to learn valuable tips on producing and marketing your audiobooks. This podcast is sponsored by Pro Audio Voices, helping great stories come alive through audiobook production and marketing. Hello, and thank you for joining me for this episode to discuss full cast audiobook projects. We'll start off with a description of what I consider a full cast audiobook and the way that I define that. And then we'll get into some finer detail about some options that you have, ways to think about your full cast audiobook project. And then we'll also talk a little bit about how to evaluate what you're listening to when you are in the production process for your audiobook project. And I'll also reference some existing award-winning projects that I actually have a very different opinion about and would not consider them necessarily award-worthy. But we'll get into all of that as we go forward. So let's jump right in. To start off, the way that I think of a full cast audiobook, the way I would define it, is that we're using multiple voices to voice the character's dialogue within the audiobook. Most often, we would be casting someone who would be the narrative voice. That's the person who reads all the stuff that is not dialogue. And then a voice for each of the main characters, the primary characters who have dialogue throughout the audiobook and who are at the center of the story. They're going to have the bulk of the dialogue. Now, I want to pause here and just say that many times, very frequently, we will use the same voice for the narrator who is also doing the main protagonist of the story. And then any other main characters, primary characters, would be a different person. Then we are looking next at the secondary characters who are running throughout the story, typically, and have a fair amount of dialogue, but they're not quite as central. They don't have quite as much dialogue. Often these are also cast one actor per character. And then from there, we start looking for people who can effectively differentiate their voice to voice several different characters. And they would then be used, ideally, not speaking that both characters in the same scene. Let's say if we have a voice who's doing maybe 5 characters and 2 of those are in the same scene, we would ideally not have it be the same actor, although sometimes it works out that way. And you just aim to have, as much as possible, different voices for the different characters in each scene. So then you're sort of filling out the cast with those other voices. There are also projects where there may be multiple points of view in the story. And so those kinds of projects could either go with a full cast approach where you have the dialogue in each chapter being done by the other character voices, the other actors, or you can have a full chapter, including all the dialogue in that chapter, read by that one narrator. Now, in those point of view multi-voiced projects, in other words, one chapter is read by one voice and so on, but it changes and you have multiple narrators for the project, then I don't think of those as a full cast project. Others may, but my definition of full cast would be that the dialogue is handled as a full-on acting scene. The other style, where one voice is reading the full chapter, including all dialogue within it, I would call that a multi-voiced project. Now, in both cases, they are multi-voiced. There are, multiple actors who are handling the overall text. But again, for my definition and what we're going to use for this podcast, full cast means that dialogue is handled by multiple people. And this full cast approach is one in which we at Pro Audio Voices handle using directed sessions. So we have all the actors together each in their own recording studio, but we are recording together as a scene and we have director present so that we can get that really true feeling and interaction that is ideal and really kind of lives up to the story that we're trying to tell, really embraces it and brings it to life in the most effective way possible, I believe. I'm going to do a little bit of a side note here in that I know that other companies who do full cast projects, kind of in the way that I also define full cast projects, but their production technique is quite different. They actually have each actor come separately with the director so that they're acting out of context. They're being directed, so the director has that audio vision of what's going to happen, but they're not really reacting to what they have heard. They're doing their best to imagine what has been heard, and based on their director's feedback, they're hopefully going to land in a good place. But I think that kind of misses the boat. And I know it's not nearly as enjoyable as well for the cast of the audiobook. So I just wanted to mention that because if you're having your audiobook being produced as a full cast project, you might want to know that there are different ways of producing a full cast audiobook and that it does make a difference in the final product. So now, having defined what I mean by full cast, I want to move into some of the things that I think are important as we move into preparing for a full cast project. And the first, as is true, I believe, with all audiobooks, the first really comes back to the goal. What is your goal, your intention as the author to choosing full cast as the approach for your audiobook? It's not necessarily going to differ dramatically from your goal for your audiobook or your book overall, nor should it. But it can be helpful to be aware and conscious about the choice for it to be a full cast audiobook, because it can affect the way that you make your decisions and you work with your producer in terms of the style that is used. For example, if you have, let's say, a thriller and a part of your goal is to really engage your listener in a heart-stopping, breathtaking kind of way, full cast is going to be a great option for you because of the enhanced elements that are added into that really support that kind of goal. And it's true, something that, some authors will say that they maybe do listen to audiobooks, but doing a full cast audiobook is not necessarily their preferred way of listening. In other words, some people lean into that full cast, that full, almost like a movie in your mind, but you're just hearing the sound of it. Some people really lean into that and love it. And there are others who, for whom that is not their preference. So if you, as an author, if that's not your preference, if it's something that you kind of lean away from, then it's good to know that and to acknowledge it, because it may mean that doing a full cast approach would not be a good choice for you. So if you're one of those authors, there's probably a good chance you're not even listening to this episode right now. Totally fine. Personal preference does play a part of this overall equation as you're trying to figure out what's going to be the best approach for your particular audiobook. Now, I want to go just a little deeper on this question of goal, but it's going to move us into the realm of style. What your goal is, as I suggested with the heart-stopping thriller approach, the style is going to be impacted by your material and also your goals. Now, for example, we're currently working on a very fun audiobook, full cast. Well, it's sort of technically full cast, but there are just two of us in the cast, the author and myself. And we're doing Pirates of Sausalito, Houseboat Wars Murder Mystery. And it's really fun. There's a kind of caricaturish quality to it. It's very much like it was actually done as murder mystery theater, and this is the novel version of that piece. So it has a really fun, almost cartoon-ish, sort of leaning in a little bit in that direction. And knowing that actually changes, knowing that we can kind of lean into that style and have a lot of fun with it. And I think that the listeners will have a lot of fun with it as well. On the other hand, we're also working on very serious material like Postcards to Hitler, A German Jew's Defiance in a Time of Terror by Bruce Newberger. And this has a very serious tone, as you can imagine. It's a time of, it's a fictionalized elements of it, but it is basically a true story of the author's families and their communities' experience in the Holocaust. And so it has a very different tone. And if we applied the tone of Pirates of Sausalito to Postcards to Hitler, it would be a disgrace and a fiasco that is not in line with the material, the tone of the material, the goal of the material, any of that. So it's really important to recognize what the goal is, what the style is that should be applied, and to move from that place as we make production decisions. It's fitting the content and the message to the production. And one of the things that we are conscious of and even learning even deeper in the process of the production of Postcards to Hitler is that we, in some cases, need to thin things out, to simplify in some ways in order to stay with the tone and keep it really true and to keep it as focused and deep as this material is. You might ask, what exactly does that mean? Well, it can mean backing off on accents that may be too strong. It can mean removing some of the plan for sound effects that may not be necessary to keep it in this strong, focused style. It can mean the utilization of music to carry and help enhance the emotion rather than some other options involving sound effects instead. So these are they're very creative decisions. There's no right or wrong, but by being very conscious of and staying focused on the style, the goal, making sure that these decisions are in alignment with the material itself, then we are able, as we move through the process and learn in the process where we need to make these adjustments. This is all an important piece of the overall production process. And it takes quite a bit of time and focus to be able to make these kinds of decisions. Let's just take a short pause, and then when we come back, we'll talk some more about this kind of density of the soundscape, and then some about how to listen to your project as it is in the process of production and when that happens. We'll be right back.
Do you have a book that you imagine with multiple voices, or a screenplay or stage play? At Pro Audio Voices, We love working on these more complex productions with music and sound effects and a full cast of voices. Bringing together decades of experience in both theatre and audio production, our team brings your project to life. From manuscript preparation to casting to directing the actors and a post-production team to bring it all together, Pro Audio Voices brings your project to life. Learn more at proaudiovoices.com/full-cast.
So we were talking about that soundscape, music, and sound effects, and how important it is to manage and make creative decisions that are appropriate to and in alignment with the style of and goal of the material, the content. Let me give you some examples of different approaches that we would use in different kinds of audiobooks. So in Pirates of Sausalito, let's talk about that. This has each chapter is written from the point of view of one of the characters, and there are several characters that are all, it's a very nice ensemble-based piece. So what I mean by that is that there's not like one character that is doing almost all the talking. It's really fairly balanced. And with each chapter being from one character's point of view, it gives, it adds to that ensemble feel. One of the things that we're doing for that project is creating like a little kind of character theme music, if you will, sort of a little stinger of sound that fits each character so that when it's their chapter, their point of view, we'll be able to play that. And that will just also add to the clarity for the listener as to who's speaking, whose point of view are we listening to. And it's kind of a fun approach. It's like that murder mystery dinner theater kind of vibe to it, which is fitting for that particular piece. Now, with Postcards to Hitler, as I talked about that one, that has such a very different style and feel. And here we're looking for those places in the text where there's a group scene. Let's say it's a crowd, okay? And there are several of those where there are some violent things going on. Well, adding in a whole bunch of, just as an example, if you have like a fight scene and you're adding in all the typical fight kinds of sounds that you might hear if you were watching a feature film, the punches, the kicks, the hits, the things like that. Or with weapons, the slice of the knife or the swing of the sword or the shot of the gun. The thing about adding in all of that detail is it can get really kind of messy in a way. And yes, a fight scene, in some ways, we would want it to have sort of a messy feel to it, but we don't want to lose sight of the fact that what we're actually creating is an enhancement to the story, that voiceover, that narration, the dialogue that's happening, that's the focus. If we get too carried away with the sound effects and start trying to create that scene, there's a tendency, and I've heard productions that do this, that make this mistake. I consider it a mistake. And what happens is that you end up with too much of noise, if you will, and the story can kind of get lost in the mix. And then you're focused on just the sound effects. So in moments like that, music can be tremendous value because it can give us the emotional feel that we're trying to create with that otherwise set of sound effects, right? Instead of trying to realistically create those sounds, instead we are supporting the emotional vibe of that scene through music. And the music might have certain percussive elements that are suggestive of the punch or the shot or whatever it is. And so listening for, trying to find and source that kind of music. It can be very, very effective. So earlier today, I was looking over who won the Audio Awards. And so I was looking at the one that was produced by Audible Studios. And it's a full cast kind of production, lots of voices, many famous voices. And I listened to the sample. Actually, I didn't listen to the entire sample because I was turned off almost immediately. Because in that case, what I was hearing sounded very overproduced. It sounded slick and loud and busy, and I couldn't even follow what they were really saying because there were all these whoosh and sounds and different changing voices and highs and wow. It was just, it was so much. It just sounded like noise to me. Now, okay, I have my own opinions about, I have opinions about the Audio Awards. And yes, I think sometimes they very deservedly award audiobook projects, with that deserve it. But there are times when it just really feels like it's, this is Audible, it's all about Audible. And so so we end up with awards like this where I just feel like, really? Is that really that was the best? Because to me, as I say, I love full cast projects, but I was immediately turned off by that simply because there was so much noise. So what that brings to mind for me is, what is your goal? I'm kind of getting this style vibe, but what am I supposed to get out of this cacophony that was happening in the sample? It did also make me wonder if this sample that they presented was not, as they require everyone else to do, was not actually a true sample from the book, but maybe some kind of description or a trailer. Now, that is not even permitted as an option to submit when you submit to those platforms. But of course, it's Audible, it's their own platform, so they can do whatever they want. And maybe that was a trailer that was, and maybe the whole audiobook isn't like that. If the whole audiobook is like what the sample was online, then I would never listen to it. It would wear me out very quickly. So I just wanted to bring that up as an example because it actually was the very experience in listening to that was what triggered me recording this podcast episode, because I thought, wow, I should comment on this. And not everyone will agree with me, and that is totally fine. I have my own opinion, so I state it as such. So now I want to just take a moment to help you as you maybe are already in the process. There is a challenge that happens, and the challenge is around how do you listen to the project when you're in the phase of the project where you're listening to just the voices without all the rest of the enhancements that may come later, depending on your project. And so I bring it up as a challenge for this reason, because there may need to be some adjustments. That would be normal, right? And it's important for you as author to be able to listen and to note things that you would like changed, but and to understand that it is a part of the process, just like when you're having your manuscript edited and you get notes back from the editor, or if you get a draft back from the editor with their notes on it. That doesn't mean that the project is now it's done. I have to incorporate everything that the editor put in there, and that's it. So you might not be happy with some of the editor's choices or suggestions. well, you don't have to accept them, right? So you know that about the editing process. And what I want to bring into your awareness or your understanding is that in the production process for audiobooks, at least in working with Pro Audio Voices, so I can really only speak from our perspective. I'm sure that there are other companies, because I hear about what others are doing, that don't give you the opportunity to say, actually, you know what? I thought I wanted this actor for that voice, but it's not landing the way I had hoped. But when working with Pro Audio Voices, that is something that you can say and that we can work through, because the project is not complete until it is approved and the final files are approved by you as the author, as the rights holder. So how do you listen? It's tricky because the audiobook production company, typically those of us who are in the industry and are used to working with this kind of material, and we know how to listen, we can imagine the other pieces that are going to be fitting in and how it's going to come out. But it's harder for you as author who may not have ever had an audiobook created for you, let alone a full cast audiobook created for you to understand how to listen and what those things are. So what I recommend for you is that listen and, try to stay open-minded about it, and then just write down your questions or things that you are finding you don't feel happy with or you would like to have a little bit different, and just work with your producer to figure out what can be done, what is the best approach, and and trust them with that process and working through it with you, because it is a process and it is a collaboration. Certainly it is at Pro Audio Voices. Again, I can really only speak fully from what we do at Pro Audio Voices rather than what everyone else out there in the industry is doing. And hopefully others are also treating it as a collaborative process with you. If they're not, then that's sad for me to hear, and I would encourage any other producers that are listening to this episode to treat it as a collaborative process. Okay, so we've talked about what a full cast project is, the importance of knowing what your goal and style is. So make sure that your content and the message itself is being properly treated with the style. It's in alignment with the style of the production. We've talked a lot about the sort of the density of that soundscape, how and when kind of to use sound effects or music, and then gave you at least one example of an overproduced piece, to my mind, and then how to listen to your full cast project when you're in the production phase. At the very end, once everything is put together, your producer tells you it's, this is sort of this is the final draft, at the moment. And then at that point, if there's anything you feel needs to be tweaked, you should definitely let them know. One of the things I will just alert you to also is that the mix is important. And what I mean in this particular moment is that levels, how loud is or are the sound effects in relation to the voice. It's important to not ever lose the voice because the sound effects or music are too loud. And as you're evaluating that, and certainly as your audio engineer is evaluating that, many times you're listening through headphones. It's very smart to listen on different devices because each one will produce a different version of that mix, slightly different. But it can be if your mix is at that close tipping point line of music or sound effects not being too loud, but maybe almost, then the device could make a difference to where you might lose some words as a result of music or sound effects. So it's good to listen on different devices. I wish that weren't the case, that it just technologically In one way, it seems like, well, why wouldn't the mix sound exactly the same from one device to another? But it doesn't. So it's good to know that going in and taking a listen. To always stay in communication with your production company. If you have any questions about the mix, how loud or soft the music or sound effects are in relation to the voice, or any concerns about which sound effects have been selected, or, and there might be things that you just want taken out, like maybe a he said, she said, or, where it doesn't feel necessary, or, where there maybe is sound effects that also may not feel necessary. So there's so many ways, so many moments to create, and the goal is always to create a finished product that is going to create a tremendously wonderful experience for your listeners. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. I hope that this has been helpful. If it has, and you would like to subscribe to our Patreon channel, we are on Patreon at patreon.com/Audiobook Connection Podcast. And also we produce a weekly newsletter. And if you would like to sign up for that, then join us over at proaudiovoices.com. It's also the best place to find your next audiobook listen. You can also go to amplifyaudiobooks.com to find that. So you'll want to check that out, pick your next audiobook listen, get that first, and then download the app so you can listen to it. It'll be in your library. Again, thank you for being with me today. Thanks for joining us for Audiobook Connection, behind the scenes with the creative teams. Please take a moment to subscribe at audiobookconnection.com. The podcast is sponsored by Pro Audio Voices, helping great stories come alive through audiobook production and marketing. Learn more at proaudiovoices.com. Again, thanks for being with us, and please join us next week.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.